Welcome back, Year 2, to our topics lesson. This week we're going to be looking at the Vikings. So the Vikings came from all around Scandinavia, where Norway, Sweden and Denmark are today. They sent armies to Britain around 700 AD to take over the land, and they lived there until around 1050 AD. They were originally farmers. Scandinavia did not provide the ground that they needed, so they went out to search for better land and any other riches they could find along the way. Even though the Vikings didn't stay in Britain, they left a strong mark on society. Even some of the names of the cities and towns have been kept the same as what the Vikings called them. They had large settlements around York in the Midlands, and you can see some of their artifacts and Viking settlements today. So let's look at some facts about the Vikings. The Vikings are also called Norsemen and came from Scandinavia. They spoke Norse, which had an alphabet made up of characters called runes. They travelled over the sea in long ships, which are very long. Narrow wooden boats that could be sailed in both deep and shallow water. The Vikings left their homeland because they were looking for better places to farm than the kind of terrain that surrounds Scandinavia. The Vikings first attacked Britain in 787 AD, but didn't start to invade and settle in the British Isles until 793. In 878, King Alfred the Great of Britain defeated the Vikings in battle and had them sign a treaty saying that they had to keep to their own land in England. This section of land was called Danelaw. Now, Jorvik was a large Viking kingdom around York. The last king of Jorvik was Eric Bloodaxe in 954. Now, Viking warriors believed that when they died in battle, they went to Valhalla. This is where the kings of the gods lived, named Odin. Now, England once had a Viking king, King Canute. He ruled from 1016 to 1035, and then his descendants ruled after. So let's take a look at the Vikings' timeline of important events. So in 787, a group of Vikings attacked the island of Portland, which is in Dorset, but then went back to their homes. A few years later, in 793, the Vikings attacked a monastery at Lindisfarne in Northumbria, and they started to settle in England, so they invaded. In 866, the Vikings raided and conquered York and established the Viking kingdom of York. 871, the Anglo-Saxon king, so the King of England, Ethelred, defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Ashton in Berkshire. And then in 878, Alfred the Great defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Ithredon. The boundary between Anglo-Saxon and Viking territory was established. Then in 950, the Viking armies raided Wales. 954, the Viking kingdoms of York became part of England again. 994, Viking armies from Denmark and Norway attempted to raid London but were defeated. So they were getting a bit weaker at that point. 1016 and 1035, Canute the Great ruled as the first Viking king of England. September the 25th, 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge took place near York between the Anglo-Saxons and the Viking invaders led by Harold Hardrada, who we'll look at in more detail soon. The 14th of October 1066, William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, won the Battle of Hastings and the Normans began to rule England. So the word Viking means a pirate raid in Norse language, which is what the Vikings spoke, and basically what they were. Now we saw earlier that the Viking alphabet, Forthrak, was made up of 24 characters called runes. Each one stood for an entire word or gods, as well as sounds and basic letters. So some of the names of towns and villages have a little bit of Norse language in them still in England. Now anything with the word by at the end, like Corby or Whitby, means farm or town. Thorpe, like Scunthorpe, means village. Have a look on the British map and see if you can find any. So the Normans from France who defeated the Anglo-Saxons, remember the kings of England, in the Battle of Hastings, were actually descendants of the Vikings. Vikings settled around more places than just Britain. They went to Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, France and Spain, and even sailed to America before it had been discovered by Christopher Columbus. But they chose not to stay. So as we know, the Vikings wanted new land because Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, weren't very easy to live. It was also really hard to grow crops, which meant there wasn't a lot of food as the population got bigger. But Britain and Europe had plenty of good farmland, so the Vikings tried to claim some of that land for themselves. Now, even though the Anglo-Saxons were pretty well established in England, the Vikings would turn up every now and again and raid the towns and take lots of land. So sometimes instead of fighting the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons decided it was better to pay them money so they'd just stay away. This payment was called Danegold. So the first Viking attack on England was in 787 on the Isle of Portland that we saw. The Vikings went home straight away, but they came back to England in 793 and raided a monastery at Lindisfarne. Monasteries were easy targets because the monks who lived there didn't have any weapons, and they did have lots of money, gold, and even food. So the Vikings believed in many different gods, and they thought making sacrifices to the gods made them all happy. They also told stories about the gods, which is called Norse mythology. Some of the most famous gods are Thor, the god of thunder; Idun, the goddess of spring; Odin, the king of the gods and god of the war; Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility and gold; and Loki, the god of mischief. So the Vikings believed that if a warrior died while fighting in battle, he'd go to Valhalla, which is where Odin was. Other heroes who had died would also be there. Odin would send his warrior maidens, called Valkyries, across the sky to ferry the dead warrior to Valhalla. So Viking warriors were very good fighters. They'd wear helmets and carry shields to defend themselves, and they'd also use one of the weapons like a spear, a sword, or a battle axe. So the boats that the Vikings built are called longships. They are long, narrow boats that can be used in both deep and shallow water, making them perfect for travelling over the ocean and carrying lots of warriors into the shores. Longships were symmetrical, meaning they looked the same at the front and the back. They'd often have a dragon's head carved at either end. Now Vikings' homes were long too. They were called longhouses. They were rectangular, made from wood, and were usually just one big room. There would be one big fire pit in the centre for cooking and keeping the house warm. The roof was covered in thatch, and there was a hole in the middle for smoke from the fire to go through. There were benches around the house that would be used to sit on and to sleep on. So what did they wear? Most clothes that the Vikings had were made from wool, but they also had some clothes made from linen. They used dyes made from plants and minerals to make red, green, brown, yellows and blues, so their clothes were very colourful. Now Viking men wore long shirts, trousers with a drawstring tie, and a coat with a belt around the waist. While the Viking women wore long dresses with a tunic over the top that was held together by two brooches pinned at the shoulder. Now both men and women wore woolen socks and leather shoes. So their hairstyles, the Viking hairstyles are often characterised by long, thick hair on the top and the back, and shaved sides. The men would often have well-grown beards, which would be braided. Whereas the women would wear their hair long and they would have braids just like the men. But the female warriors would often shave the side of their head and braid it like the men. Hope you enjoyed the lesson, Year 2. In our next lesson, we'll be looking at Viking burials. We'll be looking at what they ate and what they farmed, and some very famous Vikings like Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and many, many more. Until our next lesson, take care, and I'll see you soon, Year 2.